Well, I learned long ago we all do our best thinking on the way home from a meeting. So when we have the question and answer time, we can also go back to things we've talked about before. But in this session, I want to switch, and I talked a lot about the heart of a shepherd and all that comes with kind of the character inside out stuff in our first two sessions. This session is going to be very much more kind of Proverbs-like, if you will, nuts and bolts of how in the world do we do ministry in a way that builds winning teams. Everybody in ministry is always building a team. When I was first at North Coast, and I was the only guy for those first 5 years that had any salary from the church, I know what it's like to get there early and have to scrape the gum off the sidewalk, turn on the sound machine, and make sure that the rented place had actually cleaned up from what it had been the night before. And at that point, I was building teams of volunteers. Then our church grew, and I was building teams of staff. Then there was a sense of building a board team. And then as we had multi-sites, there was a different kind of team building. But at its very core, whether you're building a very small team in very early stages or a massive team that's like a conglomerate or something almost, the same principles apply. And so I want to talk about why some teams win and most don't. At the end of a season, there's only one winner. When you look at any particular sporting endeavor, there is only one winner per year, but along the way, there are some teams that somehow seem to be perennial winners. If they don't win the championship every year, they're always in the playoffs. They're near the top. And so I want to talk in a spiritual sense why that's true in some places and some ministries, that they just seem to produce the right kind of healthy teams, and others, once in a while, hit a home run, but then the next year it's down in the dumps. Well, one of the keys, and I'm going to give you a contrast on each of these. Winning teams do this, losing teams do the opposite. One of the things is that winning teams have winning players, and losing teams have gifted players. Winning teams have winning players, and losing teams have gifted players. I was a basketball player, so I'm a basketball fan. And every single year, there's an NBA All-Star team that's put together for both the East and the West. I pretty much can guarantee you that those All-Star teams would never be able to beat that season's NBA championship team, even though they have better players, because they don't necessarily have the chemistry. They don't have the right kind of players. There's only one ball. And the way it works is all the guys that are on the All-Star team are used to having the ball all the time on their particular team. There are very few teams out there, and very few times where we look around, whether it's volunteers or staff, we say, you know what, I think this person will mess us up. Why don't we put them on the team? Right? We just don't do that. We always think we're getting the right person. Well, this first one, on what a winning player and just a gifted but losing player looks like, the distinction actually didn't come out of Scripture. It's found in Scripture, but I didn't discover it in Scripture. I discovered it many years ago when I was reading a secular book on leadership. And it was on success and derailment. And what it did, it was a 30-year study of European, Canadian, and American businesses that were large enough that they had a fast-track kind of system for people who'd just gotten an MBA or who seemed to be very fast risers. And so what this study did is it took a look at 30 years of people who everybody thought were going to go to the top, and it asked this question: why did some make it to the top, and what was common about them? And why were others derailed, and what was common about them? And they had, I think it was 16 success factors, 16 derailment factors. But what I paid most attention to were the top 2 derailment and the top 2 success factors. And they blew my mind. And now remember, all of these people were the best of the best on their way up. No company ever says, this guy looks like a loser. Let's put him on the fast track and see what happens. Right? It's just not going to happen. They think they're going to be an A. So after 30 years of study, what were the common denominators? And I'm just going to give you the top 2 derailment factors. The number 1 derailment factor of why people that they thought would go to the top didn't was poor relationship skills. They didn't play well in the sandbox. And if they didn't play well in the sandbox, they might have all kinds of gifting, they might have all kinds of other things, but once they joined the team, the chemistry derailed them eventually. And they might rise up for a little bit, but sooner or later, their inability to play well in the sandbox and have good quality relationship skills caused them to get derailed. The second derailment factor was a lack of flexibility. A lack of flexibility. When things began to change, they didn't know how to change. I have 3 kids. One of my sons is a quintessential brain on a stick. Whatever he did was just like academically really strong. He went and he took a GMAT. That's a test you take to get into MBA programs. He took it without studying, just on a lark to see, do I want to go get an MBA? Because he'd risen up in his company. He's about 24 years old. And I think he scored like a 740, and Harvard's average score is 710. So at 24, he applied to a bunch of places. Some were like, Harvard, Stanford, stuff like that, MIT, UCLA's Anderson. And what happened is 2 of them laughed and said, come back in 4 years, child. And 2 of them, though, actually said, yeah, I'll come on. And he took one and graduated. But when it was time for him to go into the work world, part of the message was simply this. Nathan, you've done really well all your life on running on a track that somebody put in front of you. I mean, that's what school is, right? They tell you what to do, they give you a syllabus, and you go through it. And you get down that track faster than everybody else. You think you've got a whole lot together. But now you're entering into the real world, the marketplace, which, by the way, is not a whole lot different than the real world of ministry. And here's what's going to happen. 1 week after you get there, everything will change. Have you noticed that? Any of you ever laid out 5-year ministry plans? Right? They're in a drawer somewhere about week 3. Because the one thing, I'm going to give you a prophecy about the future. I want you to write it down. This is absolutely certain. It will be completely different than any of us think. Okay? That's my prophecy. It'll be completely different than anybody thinks, because it's always full of twists and turns. And what they discovered is people who seemed to have it all together but couldn't flex when they got there, and their role changed, the rules changed, the way of doing business, ministry, whatever it would be changed. They couldn't handle it. And now think with me. I bet this is true for you. In my ministry experience, virtually every lay leader, every board member, and every staff member that we've hired that I thought was going to take us to the moon and broke my heart and disappointed me, it was always one of those 2 problems. Excluding the moral things, which by the grace of God, we've been lucky. In 35 years, we had 1 moral failure only. But every single one, it was, we got them there, and my goodness, they didn't play well in the sandbox. They had bad relationship skills, but good interview skills. Those are different. Or they were very good kissing up, but once they were on the top, they weren't very good leading. You ever had that kind of person? I've had people that were very good when they're underneath you, at least when I'm around. They knew how to kiss up really, really well. But boy, suddenly when they were on top, they lorded it over people. Okay, and it all fell apart. And then the other thing was, I'd have really good people who, when we hired them, were really great as long as they joined our team and everything continued. But when the Lord said, it's time for a new strategy, we got to put some new wine in new wine skins, we got to do some things different, they balked, because somehow they thought that whatever we did yesterday was not a method. They thought it was a Bible verse. Right? And boy, that is so easy. Because can we be honest? We can put a Bible verse by everything. Okay? I'm an absolute Bible guy. I have a Bible verse for everything. I don't always say it, but I've got a Bible verse for everything. A lot are out of context, but I got a verse. And as I often tell younger leaders especially, I go, hey, when you're putting together your methods of ministry, never tack on a Bible verse. Because when you tack on a Bible verse and it's time to change your method, people are going to think you're changing your theology. And I learned this the hard way, because early on, being a Bible guy, and we had Bible verses by the way our board was structured. We had Bible verses by the way we did our service. We had Bible verses by everything. And as the world would change and it was time for us to change some of our methods, people thought I was changing my theology. So nowadays, I don't put the Bible verse anywhere. You ask me, I'll give it to you. But instead, I just have a little phrase, for now. This is what we're doing for now. And we'll see what God wants us to do for later. That's part of the reason on the Christian school thing I told you about yesterday. I do not know the future. And on top of that, I might even be wrong in the present. Whoa, how would that, So you want to leave flexibility. So anyway, that's why people get derailed. But wouldn't it be helpful to also know the top 2 success factors? So would you like to hear those just real quickly? Okay, the top 2 success factors were, number 1, the ability to adapt, flexibility. And the number 2 top success factor was people skills. Is that not bizarre? And I thought about it and I said, oh my gosh, I just figured out now how to interview people for lay capacity, board leadership capacity, or staff capacity. If I would just lead with those 2 questions, I'd have 90%, as long as they're a believer with good character and all that. What I really need to know about the job is those 2 things. And now here's what I missed. I said I got it out of secular study, not out of Scripture. The Lord had put that down long before, right? Let's talk about the importance of flexibility. How does the Apostle Paul describe his ministry in 1 Corinthians 9:16 on? Doing all things for all people that I might reach some. Okay? What does Jesus talk about? New wine needing to go in? New wineskins, okay? I mean, actually, the scriptures are full of flexibility being an important trait for ministry. Now, what about people skills? Well, that's essentially 1 Corinthians 13, is it not? And what 1 Corinthians 13 says is that if I can pray in the tongues of angels and heavenly language, prayer language, and if I have such faith that you come up afterward and you're all healed, I'm moving mountains. I know every single mystery. I mean, I'm the Bible answer man of all time. I am so compassionate. I take my salary and I turn every single penny of it over to the poor. And under a time of persecution, I'm the first to step forward and say, I'm a Jesus follower, I'll go down. But I do not love, play well in the sandbox, know how to be patient, kind, not keeping track of wrongs, not being self-serving. What do I have? I have nothing. Okay? Now, we say that at weddings, and we preach that when we're going through the passage, but I don't think we often believe it when we're building teams. Okay? Winning teams have winning players, and winning players have these 2 traits: great relationship skills and the ability to adapt. Now, the second trait is this: winning teams guard the gate. Winning teams guard the gate, and losing teams let anyone in. Winning teams guard the gate, losing teams let anyone in. I think one of the most underused traits of leadership or patterns of leadership is carefully guarding the gate on the front end. We once in a while get this idea of how, and we've seen over and over, how Jesus would reach out and take the least likely people and call them to himself and use them in leadership. So we make this mistake of saying, well, therefore, we don't want to guard the gate. We got to give everybody an opportunity. Jesus did not give everybody an opportunity. When the demoniac wanted to follow him and join him, what did he say? No, you can't do it. What did he do to the woman well? He said, no, you've got to go back. Out of all the disciples, what did he do? He said, no, all 12 of you, you get this special thing. And during another period of time, he guarded the gate and only 3 got to be around him. He guarded the gate because once they're in the pen, it's really hard to get them out. Is it not? And so, whether you're picking a leadership team or you're hiring a staff member, whatever, when you let them in and haven't carefully guarded the gate, I want to guarantee you it's 100 times harder to have them move out than it was to fill an empty slot. I would always, always, always rather go with an empty seat on the bus, just figure it out on the fly, than have the wrong person on the bus. Now, a sub of that, just real practically, a couple of things is: one, never ignore a lack of character because of an abundance of giftedness. When you're guarding the gate, you never overlook a lack of character because of an abundance of giftedness. Now, there are 3 main areas I see we do this in our churches: preaching, worship, and youth ministry. And in those areas, if somebody can really bring the word, we'll say, man, they're a powerful communicator, but they're an absolute jerk in life, and we will overlook it. I mean, I'm not going to name names, and by the grace of God, there's not a whole lot of them I know, but there are a few really nationally known, powerfully strong communicators. In other words, they have great giftedness, but they have the stinkingest character ever. I know of one person that's just a flat-out mean liar. You know, the things he will tell about people, and even in his writings, his books, people have met with him and told him this isn't true. They have the ability to check it and all of that, and he doesn't really care. He just, talking to his friends, his buddies, his big national audience, and keeps going at it and at it and at it. And people who I know are in his sphere, they'll go, I know, but he's so gifted. Okay? You can't have a winning team when you have a great player that has a spiritual issue. You're opening the door up for the Achan-like issues. You're going to, lose some battles. You can't understand how in the world we could lose these things. And God's going to say, well, because giftedness can operate in sin. See, we forget that. Mark, you and I were talking about that a little bit. That when somebody is kind and gentle and has, say, gifts of helps and mercy, they can be in the middle of an affair even, and still they're kind and gentle and have the mercy. Would you agree with me? If somebody has a gift of administration, they can administrate quite well in the middle of a porn addiction or in the middle of refusing to forgive, just being filled with bitterness over something that happened in their life. And we're not at all confused by that. But when somebody powerfully leads us in teaching or powerfully leads us in worship, we're like, how did that happen? Your gifts can be operated in the flesh, okay? They don't go away just because you're in the flesh. And even the fruit, short term, can be, the fruit of the kindness, the fruit of administration, the fruit of teaching, the fruit of all those things. God can use those things, even the flesh. But you and I, when we know, can never, ever overlook. It will always cost you. Never ignore a lack of people skills because of an abundance of Bible knowledge, would be the second sub under this one. Never ignore a lack of people skills because of an abundance of Bible knowledge. Or zeal. You might even, in parentheses, write zeal. Because here's what happens. When somebody really presses into God and really goes after Him, and with all they have, they self-study, or they take courses, they graduate, or they're just always there every time the doors are open. They're just full of Bible knowledge and full of zeal. We have a tendency to want to give them a chance, even though we know they have no chance. Right? We just don't want to say no. I teach some doctoral courses, and I used to teach some seminary courses on the master's level. And I just got to be honest with you. Sometimes I'd walk into a class, and there might be 25, 30 students in that class, and there would be 2 or 3 of them where I would get angry because the seminary was taking their money. It's like this guy or gal has no way to lead their way out of a paper bag. But because they're willing to put in all the work, they're full of zeal, they've self-studied the scripture, they give them a chance. And I go, you are robbing them. You are never doing a favor when you give somebody an opportunity to fail and you know they're going to fail. Right. That's not Jesus-like, okay? And those people skills might be they can't lead their way out of a paper bag. Let me give you just some real practical things. I just asked, do I like being around the person? Have you ever been on a team or with a group of people, and on the way to lunch you're praying, Lord Jesus, have him sit at the other table? Okay? Or you've got somebody and their breath could kill a buzzard, okay? Or they just talk too close to you, I mean, all of those kind of social things. If they're making you feel incredibly uncomfortable with their lack of EQ, emotional intelligence, don't put them in a leadership position. I don't care what their zeal is. I don't care what their Bible knowledge is, because they're going to freak out the sheep. Our ministry is built around sermon-based, a lecture lab model of small groups. So with 90+% of our people, you can imagine how many small group hosts and leaders we have. And one of the things we have to work the hardest on is fulfilling this principle. Because when we get desperate for leadership, we look for people who are zealous or biblical. And what we end up doing is say, well, let's give them a chance. And here's what happens. When we do give them a chance, everybody who was in their group bails out and they don't try another group. Okay? By the way, sometimes I believe it's the same thing with the pulpit. You guys know I'm big on sharing the pulpit, but I never let somebody preach who I know won't do a good job. I have a friend of mine, he's a famous baseball scout. He's the guy who selected, any of you baseball followers, Mike Trout, Borges, Weaver, all of those guys for the Angels, way down the draft when everybody else overlooked them. And one of the more fun things I get to do every year, he goes to North Coast Church, although he's always on the road, he's got a house in our area, so he goes there 10 times a year. But I will go with Eddie to a game, and we'll sit in the scout area, and he gives me a scout dump. And I can't tell you how informative it is, just the way they think and what they look for. But what's been fun over the years is to realize how much of that translates to good leadership in ministry, too. They don't bring somebody up from the minor leagues because he's been, he's been in the minor leagues for 10 years. He's been a faithful player. Let's give him an at-bat in the majors. Okay? You only get a chance to come up to the majors if they think you're going to hit 285. And if you hit below the Mendoza line, 198, doom, you're done. And we need to think that same way. Here's the third one that's incredibly important. Beware of Christian pit bulls and watchdogs. When you're guarding the gate, watch out especially for the Christian pit bull and watchdog. Have you noticed they're out there? I mean, there are these Christian pit bulls and watchdogs that are protecting poor baby Jesus. Right? And anybody who's a bad guy, either in the Christian community with bad theology or this, they're barking and biting at them. And the bad people out in the world, they're barking and biting them. And they think their mission in life is to protect poor baby Jesus. And I don't know how to tell them, but he's grown up. Okay? He's a lion. He doesn't need us doing that for him. But there's these people who do it. Now, here's what happens. In the Christian community, we will lift them up and we will treat them as heroes because we're blown away by their boldness and their courage. And we think they're defending righteousness. And so they often, in organizations, quickly rise to leadership levels. And here's what happens. If somebody's a Christian bulldog or pit bull or Rottweiler, the reason they bark and bite at the bad guys is because they've been bred to bark and bite. And the moment you do something they don't like, guess what they're going to do to you? The exact same thing. I bet a bunch of you who've been in ministry a longer time have had this experience. There was somebody that loved you but hated all the bad guys. And so you pull them close because you think, man, this is a man or a woman of passion. And then suddenly you did something they didn't agree with, and they turned on you like that. I have a friend of mine who bears a scar. It'll be a lifetime scar because they had an uncle who had a Rottweiler that was well-trained and very good around children and all of this kind of stuff, and always had been until for some reason, out of the blue, nobody knows why, it turned around and attacked this young guy. Now, you know what? I have tons of hurt for the young guy. I don't have a bit of pity for the guy who had the Rottweiler. And I'm shocked. Because really, at the end of the day, what he thought is his training would overcome years and years and decades and centuries of breeding. Okay? People are what they do. And so when you see somebody who's contentious, they are contentious. And just because they love you now doesn't mean they're not going to turn on you later. I believe that's why in 1 Timothy chapter 3, the list of qualifications says one who has spiritual oversight is put in that presbyteros, elder oversight role, cannot be contentious. And he doesn't say contentious for the wrong things. It's just flat out contentious. It's kind of a weird thing happens at North Coast. Like I said, these kind of people they rise up in most churches and organizations quickly because of their passion. And so they will meet Chris Brown, the other teaching pastor, or me after a service. And it's funny, they like to tell you that. Hi, I'm so-and-so, and I run the local pregnancy crisis center, which is wonderful. I'm glad we have those. But then once in a while, you talk to them a little bit more, and they're not running a pregnancy crisis center for Jesus. They're also ticked off at their very core about people and things and whatever. And so they start to surface, how single issue they are and how passionate they are and what they think of everybody who doesn't share exactly their same passion. And they have no clue, but what they're doing to us is like this. And often within about 6 months to a year, they've left because this is the first place at North Coast that, I can't move in. And we go, right. In fact, here's a list of churches if you'd like them to move into. Okay? Third, winning teams make unity a priority. They don't only guard the gate, but they make unity a priority, whereas losing teams treat it as an afterthought. This is one of the great mistakes I made in my early years at North Coast, because I thought if you love Jesus, then you and I are ready to charge hell with a squirt gun. I thought, why in the world am I going to waste my time, with little team building things and all of that? The world is going to hell in a handbasket at warp speed. We don't have time for that. Life's too short. Hell's too hot. Let's just stay on mission. Huge mistake. Huge mistake. Because what I assumed that if you love Jesus, we will love one another. I didn't read my Bible. As we've already said in one of our other sessions, starting at page 3, everything goes wrong. And the very next story, to make sure we understand how bad it went wrong, is one brother killing another brother over a worship war. Right? And then we talked about last night, you've got Barnabas. Do you all agree now he's a pretty cool guy? And we all agree Paul's a pretty cool guy. And they have a stinking church split. In the letter to the Ephesians, you get a little window of what's going to happen as they're going to lose their agape in one generation, because I believe it's Ephesians 4 where he says labor, and the Greek word is labor intently with everything you've got to preserve the unity of the Spirit. Never treat unity as an afterthought. It is something we have to go after, and go after hard. That means we've got to do things that bond us together as people, not just bond us together in mission. Because when we become friends and love one another, we disagree. When we don't know each other, we fight and devour. It's a really amazing thing. Let me give you an illustration from our church. Like I said, by the grace of God, we've only had one moral failure, and it took a long time, about 20 years before we had it. But I didn't know at that point something I've since learned, and that is any group of people that are trying to decide how to deal with something like that, they fall into very quickly two extremes. One is family system, and the other is justice. On the family system side, his name was Drew. I'll call him Drew. When Drew fell, the family system people, he had a child with some special needs. The family system people said, the whole body's going to watch how we deal with this. So we've got to take good care of him. We've got to pay for his counseling. We got to pay for the medical stuff for his child. In fact, we ought to start a college fund for all of his children. Okay? That's kind of over here. Now, the justice people, they said, I was just reading about Achan and what happened to his family. Have you guys experienced that? So if you don't have a plan of how to deal with something like that, everybody goes to those two extremes. Well, that was the most hellacious meeting I have ever been in. I remember being so angry at him, not just for his sin, but after 20 years of the incredible unity we had and stuff, I watched our meeting just begin to fall apart as we as elders tried to decide what to do. And the justice guy said he has been killing us the whole time this has been hidden in the unseen realm. And man, there were some suggestions of what to do to him. And then over here, people wanting, we got to love and, care. And I'm just watching things being said. You ever been in those meetings where incredibly hurtful things are said that you don't get over? And I'm just thinking, Drew, you just killed this church. I'm going to kill you. I kind of moved over to the justice side. And then some guy, we have a constitution, and some guy found it in a drawer somewhere. We pulled it out. You think I'm kidding, don't you? Whatever. And we said, wow, there's something that says here to do. So we all agreed. It says we weren't going to come to peace. We all agreed just do what the dumb document says and we're done. Now, here was the weirdest thing. We came together our next meeting and it was like nothing had ever happened. And it wasn't because we buried the hurtful things that were said. It's because we had grown so deeply over the years in our unity. In a sense, it validated everything I'd ever spoken about, written, and done, to watch all hell break loose and watch us get over it and get back on mission and get back on loving one another. Because brothers can fight, can give one another black eyes, be sent to their room for a timeout, and later in the afternoon they're playing and laughing. Right? But strangers, They remember everything said and everything done. Unity is not an afterthought. Now, another sub of this is something else, and that is we have to have the guts to cut out disunity, when it shows up. Cut out the cancer of disunity. What does Titus say? You warn a factitious man once, you warn a factitious person twice, and then you what? Kick them out. I find that often we are not willing to cut out the cancer of disunity because we're afraid of the collateral damage. Because so-and-so is good friends with this family, or they're, one of the key band members here, or they're part a major donor, or they've been around forever and have lots of friends. And so what we will do is we will let that cancer stay and let it spread because we are afraid of collateral damage. Listen, it's never fun to get rid of cancer, but if you don't get rid of cancer, you will die. Steve Jobs of Apple had pancreatic cancer, which is normally a quick death sentence, right? But actually, when they went back in, they discovered it was a kind that can be medically treated. But he did not want to experience the collateral damage that went with that treatment. So what Steve decided to do was to take a series of more natural, if you will, ways of dealing with it. And then later on, nothing had happened. And so by the time he went for medical attention, it was too late. My wife and I went through the same thing many, many years ago. She had, at a young age when it's most dangerous, and at a time where they didn't even have all that we have now on it, she had very serious breast cancer, stage 4 type stuff. By the grace of God, Nance is fine and well today. But we had to make some decisions. We had to decide, were we going to mutilate her body and pour it into her body? We call it chemo. It's chemicals. And they are chemicals that are made to kill stuff. And they kill the cancer, hopefully, and they kill a bunch of other stuff. And they leave you with lifelong residual impacts. It was a very tough choice, actually, especially at that time and with her kind and the extreme level of chemo that they were going to give her. And they still, 16, 17 years later, they have an impact upon her. They had an immediate impact upon her physically, her emotionally, put you into things like an early menopause, all kinds of stuff like that. They impacted our life greatly. But she's alive. I talked to her last night on the phone. I get to come home tonight and, well, she'll be asleep, so I don't get to give her a kiss. It's just like, hi. She might swing at me. But I get to see her because I was willing to say, you know what, this cancer is an enemy and we're going to do whatever it takes to get rid of it. I have another friend that at that same time, he and his wife decided the collateral damage of the treatment was too great. So once a year, he visits her gravesite. Men and women, you have to have the courage to deal with sin. 1 Corinthians chapter 5 on the church discipline, it's a list. It's not every little thing, but there's a specific list there. If you want to build a healthy church and a winning team, you have to have the guts to deal with that. You're going to have the guts to cut out the cancer or it will slowly spread. And the weird thing is people can smell disunity when they visit. You know, they just walk in and they go, everybody's smiling, but nobody's happy. You know, you just can sense it. Winning teams make unity a priority. Losing teams treat it as an afterthought. Number 4, winning teams focus on their mission. Losing teams focus on their successes. If you're not careful, you lose your mission and focus on your success. And our successes are not always aligned with our mission. Beware of something called mission creep. Y'all know what mission creep is? Originally, it was a military term, and it's like you go for one purpose and you end up doing something completely different. You go to slow down a rebellion, American army that gets involved in everything, goes down to slow down an uprising somewhere, and the next thing you know, they're doing traffic control. You know, and it's just like, well, how did this mission shift happen? There's an organization known as the YMCA. What's it stand for? Young Men's Christian Association. Now, their mission was to reach young, what? Men for Christ. And they used housing in metropolitan areas and recreation to reach who? Young men for Christ. But over time, as the culture shifted, they weren't as successful at reaching young men for Christ. But they were very good at getting people to sign up to swim in the pool and young girls to learn gymnastics. And so what did they do? They changed their mission to match their successes. And only recently have they changed their name to be more honest. They just call it the Y. But it's been a long time that you didn't have to be a Christian to be an area or regional director or leader. And they just kind of said, well, we're not very good at this anymore, but we're good at this, so let's pour our focus and our money where all the people are showing up. Now, the YMCA has every right to do that. It's not a church. I really don't care. In fact, I'm kind of glad they did that because I taught my daughter gymnastics at a very cheap price. And lots of my staff exercise at their places. So thank you, Y. But as a church, we don't have that freedom. We don't have that freedom at all. And now you're asking, well, how in the world do we do that? Well, my belief is probably every program in your ministry was designed for a purpose. There was a bullseye. We're going to do this for this reason. And then we go and see where the arrows are landing. And if the arrows are landing the bullseye, we keep doing it. But I want to challenge you and say often when the bullseye is over there and we're shooting our arrows at it, but all of the arrows land here, in fact, the same spot, they land so well they start splitting the arrows, we just pick up our target and move it over to where the arrows are landed. Let me give you one in my kind of tradition in my area. It's called holiday entertainment. Churches have decided that we're responsible for holiday entertainment in our community. So at Easter and Christmas, we put on dog and pony shows in lots of our churches. Now I served at the second large, it was what was called Baptist General Conference. I was a youth pastor at one, not long, and you'll see why. But we had the most amazing music performances we put on. And back then the culture was more culturally Christian, so even at Good Friday and Easter they'd do stuff, but at Christmas, man, they'd put on the dog. And the programs got so large we had to have multiples. Then they got so large we had to have multiples all weekend. Then they got so large we had to ticket it and do it all week. You know those kind of drills, right? And here's what happened. I asked this question at a staff meeting. I said, why are we doing this? Now you need to know I come from a place where I have deep roots and large extended family that are all together, and forgive me, but I don't want to be at church. I want to be with my family on those days, okay? And so I was wondering, like, man, why am I killing myself every Christmas for this stuff? So I asked, I said, why are we doing this? They said, oh, here's why. We're doing this because people who never come to church will come for our program. And then when life hits them, we'll already have a contact with them, and they'll come back to our church, and we'll have a chance to present Jesus. And I said, that's awesome. I mean, really. That's awesome. Like, I'm so sorry. I didn't know that's why we're doing it. That is, like, then that's worth doing. But I asked another question. Has it ever happened? Well, of course it's happened. And then I asked another question. Well, like who? And this big church back then at 1,200, when that was really large, the staff racked their brains for a few minutes, and then they came up with 2 or 3 different families they could name out of all these years and all these hundreds of thousands of dollars and all of this energy who had actually come to Jesus because of it. And then I made another suggestion. I said, can we not do it next year? Give me 1/2 of that money, and I will lead 10 to 20 times more youth to Jesus with lifelong commitments and following. That was not the smartest thing for me to have said. But it was true. But you see what they'd done is because every year more people came to it, they put more and more energy and focus on it. And I want to encourage you to, every time you do a ministry, first of all, our main bullseye is the Great Commission, is it not? Okay. And our next bullseye is some aspect of the Great Commission. And I'm not suggesting you go home with a meat cleaver, because if you go home and start killing stuff, you'll be a murderer and you'll be put in jail. But you can starve things to death and nobody will notice. Which is what we did with our holiday entertainment. I'll have to tell you sometime our solution. But what I encourage you to do is to make sure before you start anything that you know why you're doing it. And then you ruthlessly judge whether or not it's working. Because we've got only so much time, so much money, and so much energy. And to waste it on the crowds when it's not serving our Lord and His calling and His mission is a mistake. Now, I wouldn't pastor a church as large as ours if I thought crowds don't matter. And Jesus ministered to crowds, and I'm good with things that they're called pre-evangelism. You guys have heard of those things. At our church, we do we're very, quote, we were missional before it was missional. We do over 2 service projects a day in our community, and every 2 years we close down our church and do 48 hours. We call it a weekend of service. The last one, we had 600 projects on 182 sites, 50 schools, and 10,600 of our own people in 48 hours do over $2 million worth of blessing to the community. And by the way, that doesn't count man hours. You know, some organizations count, well, you know, a gardener, $10 an hour. No man hours. This is real cost of stuff. Well, you know what? We never see anybody come to Jesus with that, ever, okay? But our goal is to create a tilt. Our goal is to have the community start thinking we're not a leech on, in America, property without property taxes and all that. Our goal simply was that all the community service organizations and all the politicians would smile when they heard the name North Coast Church and would feel like North Coast Church is a blessing to our community. If it was taken away, our community would hurt. And since that was our bullseye, I don't care that the next week is not some massive jump in attendance of people seeking Jesus, but we know what we're doing and why we're doing it. Does that make sense? Winning teams remember what it's all about, okay? And it's about winning championships in the sports realm, you know? But sometimes you'll get a player. Grew up in LA, so I'm a Laker fan. You'll get a Kobe Bryant who he talks about it's about winning championships, but it's really about scoring as many points as he can. Well, you're not going to win a lot of championships when you do that. In fact, any of you longtime sports fans, there was a time where a guy, Shaq O'Neal and Kobe Bryant were both on the same team. And they could have won 7, 8, 9, 10 championships together. And boy, they talked about winning time and championships. But at the end of the day, they were both about who's scoring the most points. And they ended up splitting and going in different directions. Where there was another guy named Magic Johnson. Some of you have heard of him. And when he talked about winning time, he meant winning time because he never, ever cared whose team it was. He just cared whether the trophy was lifted up. In fact, when he first came, I love he was in Michigan as a high schooler. He was part of the state championship team. Then his first year in college, they won the NC2A championship. Then his first year in the NBA, they went all the way to the championship, NBA championship. And there was a player named Kareem Abdul-Jabbar on the backside of his career. And when Magic comes, Magic kept calling it Kareem's team, Kareem's team, Kareem's team. Never made it my team, all of the Kobe, Shaq kind of stuff. And in the playoffs, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar twisted an ankle. And they were playing Philadelphia. Some of you remember a guy named Dr. J, a great basketball player in that team. And without Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, they went back to Philadelphia. And Magic Johnson, the point guard, played center, point guard in every position, scored 42 points as they ran away and won the championship. Now, here's the cool thing. He could have done that all season long, every game. But he knew if he did that all season long, he'd win an MVP and a scoring championship, but they wouldn't win an NBA championship. So I think he averaged 18 points, and Kareem led the league in scoring. And all the articles were about Kareem, and they lifted the championship. Never forget what your mission is, okay? A scoring title's nice. A championship is what we've been called to strive for. Winning teams versus losing teams. There really is a difference. And it's not just who has the best players. It's the right kind of players and the courage to keep the wrong kind out of the game. So there you have it, winning teams, losing teams, some of the difference. What we want to do now is open it up for some questions. Mark, how do you want me to do that?
Let's just have folks just raise their hand, and you point at them. I'll run over and put the mic in their face.
How about in their hand?
I never let go of the mic.
Smart guy. I need to learn that.
Larry, you talked about, you'd rather have an empty seat in the bus rather than having the wrong person on the bus. So if you find out that you've got the wrong person on the bus, how do you get them off the bus?
Well, here's why I am so big on guarding the gate. It's almost impossible. Okay? Now, if they cross over the line of spreading slander, rumor, and all of that, then you have to have the guts to do what Titus 3, 9 and 10 says. But the problem is usually when you get the wrong guy on the bus or wrong gal on the bus, what they do to cause disunity, none of it you can get your hands on, right? They're like Jell-O. You said, but they have a reason why they said it. You did, but and you just can't pin it down. So by far, it is best to guard the gate. And no matter how painful it is to guard the gate, it'll be 100 times less painful than trying to empty the pen. Now, when you do when you do have to empty the pen, I remember one case when I first came. Any of you have read my book? I think it's called Unifactor to tell the story. The chairman of the board and the treasurer was not part of the pulpit committee that called me to come. He was in Europe when I came, and so he shows up, and there's this 28-year-old punk kid that's now their pastor. He sets me down, and he asks me what my vision is, and then he points his finger at me afterward and says, "Well, that's all fine and nice, Sonny, but we'll run the church, you preach, and don't forget it." You see, he was a former mayor of Burbank, used to running everything, and no one had told me about him. And to be honest with you, there was no way. I just prayed him out. Took 4 years, and Jesus finally moved him. But does it come to the point of disunity? One of the real practical things I've had to do at times is I'll set together, say it's a board level thing on a staff member we need to remove. Have you ever noticed people will say one thing to your face with courage, but in the group they lose all their courage? So I'll tell them. And by the way, this guy has great courage, the chairman of our board, but I would go, "Mark, okay, you and I agreed to this here. I'm going to hold you to that in the meeting. We're going to call this guy on the carpet. We're not going to let him get away with it." But it's amazing how many people wilt in the pressure of the meeting to say what they were more than willing to say in the hallway. And then I do some mentoring of young pastors, and every now and then, I try to give a lot, but iron sharpens iron. You get something back. And I remember one guy I'm mentoring, and he gave this thing, and I said, "Dude, Jesus is going to always have to remind me you gave it to me because I'm going to act like it's mine, so I'm good with the Lord now." But here's what he said. When you've been praying that somebody will leave, and they say, "Maybe I ought to leave," right? We have that happen, right? "Well, maybe I just don't fit here." You know what we do? We go into pastor mode, right? You've been praying for 6 months that they just feel that their name's not on this anymore. And they go, "Pastor, I'm just feeling like maybe I'm not a fit for this team or this church or whatever." And instead of going, "Thank you, Jesus," we go, "Oh, no, we can work it out." And Jesus is up there, "Dude, I just did it. I parted the Red Sea, walk." Right? So here's a little key phrase. Here's the phrase. Take the keys, put them in your pocket, and then pastor them. And that has been gold for me. Because most of the people that need to leave know they're not fitting in, and they will say a comment like that. And until that guy said it, I look back and I realized I'd always moved into pastor mode. And the very next time I had that, and I don't have a lot of that, we fired 8 people in 35 years. So we've been a pretty healthy organization. But I had a guy in a particular role that was driving me nuts because he just wasn't doing his job right. And so he looked at me in a meeting where he'd given me wrong information. Again, I go, "So-and-so, it's like, I got to redo all the math. I can't trust your numbers." He says, "Listen, if you're not happy with the department and my leadership, I'll leave." And I looked at him and I said, "Okay." And his eyes got about that big. And Doug Kyle's the name of the pastor who taught me this. And I went, "Okay, Doug, your inner Doug, get your inner Doug." And I said, "Okay." And then, so I took the keys, and then I said, I'll call him Joe because that's not his name in this case. And I said, but Joe, I'm going to make sure you land well. And if your spirit is good, we're going to be in this thing together, but it's obviously not working out, but I am on your team. And you know what? He and his wife worship with us every single week to this day. Okay? And yet he was taken away from one of our top positions. But I would have fired his butt, man. He's gone had he turned sour or anything. But he actually was 9 months more in that role as we kind of moved it away. I took things back for myself and all that. But I let him ride the thing out as he looked for a job because he was a man of integrity. We'd spelled out what was expected. And so I think a lot of us could have more success if we do that quicker. And instead of moving to pastor mode, when Jesus just parted the Red Sea, we set up camp. It's crazy.
Larry, when you talk about guarding the gate versus letting anyone in, you're looking at hiring somebody or bringing them on the team and you see a potential problem that you think might disqualify them. Do you ever take time to work with them to see if you can bring them through that, or do you just know that that just doesn't happen?
If it's small, but I've learned to trust my gut. I mean, there's a couple of things here. In some tribes, we call it insight. In other tribes, we call it words of wisdom or knowledge, okay? But it's the same. I have had an amazing ability over the years to read people. You know, sometimes I'm wrong. I'm not like 100%. So I hyper-trust my gut. But the more I talk to people, I think most of us should trust our gut. Those initial impressions are usually pretty true. Once in a while, they're wrong. And when I find they're wrong, it's usually because I didn't think the guy would be or gal would be as good as they are, and they're even better. But when I see a yellow flag, a red flag about their marriage, the way they treat their spouse, their comments about the previous place they are, they go, ooh, that usually gets worse, not better over time. So again, my staff is full of sinners, led by a sinner. So come on, let's be real here. But those kind of things that you go, oh, well, maybe, come on. And if I don't want to have lunch with you after the first meeting, I'm not going to want to have lunch with you after 20 meetings. It's guaranteed. Does that help?
Yeah, so my question is about the mission creep thing you were talking about. You spoke about moving the targets to match where the arrows are landing and following our successes. At the same time, you speak of an essential quality of team members needing to flex and change and the dangers of those who can't. So do you have any advice on how a church or an organization can know when it's moving the target wrongfully or because God wants the focus of the direction to change? Is the original vision or mission of a group always
No,
untouchable?
sometimes you start out something that has other things it does. But here's what I'm really getting at is probably the most practical part of what I was trying to point out is we will have programs we do and we judge by whether they're growing, not whether they're expanding the kingdom. Okay? For instance, again, this is description, not prescription, as I've said a few times, but you have to have something to put your hands around. I talked about holiday entertainment. By the way, some places it works really well, and then I'm all for the best holiday entertainment. Just ask yourself why you're doing it. But there's a thing called VBS, Vacation Bible School. Almost all the churches in our area do VBS because they think they're reaching children at a ripe young age for Jesus. And all they're doing is providing childcare for all the Christians in the community as they jump from church to church. Okay? And so we don't do VBS for the very simple reason I took score. I said, now why are we doing all this? And everybody kept telling me, reach kids for Jesus. Nobody wanted to do it as babysitting. And yet we would then go around and see all the others. And frankly, North Coast dominates all of them. In fact, we had an embarrassing experience one time. There's a church down a couple miles from us, and Chris Brown had young kids at that point, and he and his wife, went to the, you always end up with that final program, so all the parents will come, and everybody was saying, Pastor Chris, Pastor Chris, Pastor Chris. So this one family came up to him and said, we just want to thank you for putting on this program. It's like, I didn't put on this program, I'm just here. And the reason everybody's calling Pastor Chris is because about 70% of the people went to North Coast, And so this, does that help you? So midweek children's program, VBS, adult Sunday school. I mean, you can name anything. A door-to-door evangelism campaign we used to do. We always got decisions, but we never saw any fruit. Nobody ever showed up. We had, a few hundred people come to Jesus, but our church grew by 0. That's like, okay, something's wrong. So that's really more what I'm talking about. Because there could be a time and a place where, okay, this exists just for the fellowship, but let's be honest about it. But you don't want to put all your chips into something that's not doing at all what you want. Does that help clarify it? Okay, good question.
So you talk about using your gut when you're doing the guarding the gate. Do you have at North Coast like a screen in or a screen out process that you take potential hires through?
Yes. We call it a couple of key things we've learned over the years. First of all, you always have 3 interviews. 3 separate interviews, not same day. I don't care how far we got to fly you, it's going to be 3. Because on the first one, you're on your best behavior. On the second one, you're thinking it's going pretty well. On the third one, you think you got it. And now we know who you are and how you respond. Okay? We catch how you deal with a waiter, a waitress that's slow to bring the meal. I mean, all kinds of those things are going to be everything about who you are and how you deal with people. So we do a 3 interview. Second, we always have wives involved in things. You know, now in our structure, I've come from a more complementarian background, which is, you know, basically our pastors are male and our board is male. We have women pastors on our staff or whatever, but our tradition is more complementarian. I don't have a chip on my shoulder about that. Someday I'll stand before Jesus, say, I had to make a choice on a tough passage. If I was wrong, I think he'll forgive me. And if I was right, I think he'll forgive everybody else, you know, like whatever. Yes, so believe me, but I need to answer this one. I need to paint that part of the picture for you. And so biggest mistakes I ever made were when the men decided that we knew better than the women. And so we have huge female input into our stuff. All the women pastors involved, the wives involved, and they have massive veto power. In fact, the only horrific hire I ever made was the one my wife didn't think I should make. And, you know, it was... So, but honey, I'm in ministry. I'm the pro. I've got all this experience. And then I'm eating crow.
Larry, if you could go back and if the Larry of today could go back and teach the Larry of getting started, something in the realm of leadership, what would you teach yourself?
Boy, some of you heard a talk I give called How to Grow a Church and Still Have a Life. So those things are really the core of it. And the first one is remember, I was in a church planter type stage starting up, and it would be plant the church you want to go to. You know? Don't plant the church, it'll be big. Don't plant the church, it'll be significant. Plant the church you'd want to go to. It's the only one God has gifted you to lead, the only one you can intuitively lead, and the only one you can be authentic in. And to this day, North Coast is a church I would go to if they didn't pay me. Please don't send that out to the elders. And that's why it's a joy. People ask like, man, 35 years and you wish you had 35 more. How do you do that? Well, because I go to a church I want to go to. Instead of spending all of my life not being who I want to be, where I want to be, man, then you need sabbaticals every time you turn around. Probably the next thing is you have nothing to prove, no one to impress. So many of us have father wounds and other junk that I was blessed. I don't have a father wound. My dad was my hero. You guys ever seen Eldridge? What's the name of the book about? Wild at Heart, that's right. A lot of guys love that book. I read it and it made no sense to me at all. And I gave it to that brain on the stick son, I said, you know, because I always give him stuff to read. He's smarter than I am. Like, help me understand it, Nathan. And he said, Dad, it's a really good book. I just don't think everybody's angry at their dad. I went, that's why I didn't. So, but for those of us who have father wounds, voices, we're never good enough, whatever, we need to learn we have nothing to prove and no one to impress. Do your best under the circumstances, then take a nap. And notice what I said. Not do your best, you will never do your best under the circumstances. Because when my kids were young and I was doing what God had called me to do, pouring into their lives, I'm coaching a team, I'm salt out of the salt shaker, meeting all kinds of non-Christians. So we had 2 Saturday night services. I'm spending Saturday in the sun trying to coach a baseball team or in the gym, a basketball team or whatever. I want to guarantee you there were plenty of Saturday night services that were not the best I could do, but they were the best I could do under the circumstances. And I would go home and take a nap rather go home and beat myself up because you could always do better.
This isn't really a question, just a quick comment, and I don't think this is what you meant, but we'll say it real quick.
Larry, I just was wondering when you say the vacation Bible school, overseas, it's a little bit of different because
Wait, when I said what was the first one?
VBS, you said vacation Bible school. Did you mean Canada and USA?
Yeah.
Because the overseas, when we do it, most people are coming is the unreached people.
Yeah,
So-
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
No, my comment was, remember, just like the weekend, holiday entertainment, vacation Bible school, children's programs, anything you do, you ask, what is our goal? And you ask the question, is that where the arrows are landing? And if the arrows are landing there, you keep doing it. But if the arrows are landing in babysitting, you stop it. So this has nothing to do, there is no program that's universal in being good and no program that's universal in being bad. In fact, the first ones, most of that get mocking or, some of the little kids programs and stuff that some churches do, whatever. Actually, there was a time and a place they all started because they worked. The problem is they kept doing them after they didn't work. And so everything has a time and a place. So I miscommunicated, so my bad on that. It's not the program, I'm talking about the goal, and just check the fruit. If you claim it's an orange grove and you're getting grapefruits, it's time to change.
This is possibly a bit of a bold question. So, you're obviously very gifted, outside of the box thinker. So, would you have hired yourself, or would you have seen you as a bit of a pit bull or lacking unity? How would that scenario have played out?
Okay, and you might want to help me clarify to make sure I'm really answering your question. Is my wife wouldn't have hired me, but I would have. When I talk about unity, I'm not talking about everybody being clones. I love people who push the envelope with the right humble spirit. So at North Coast, we're not looking for yes men and yes women. We are looking for people who will challenge us, but I'm looking for people who, when they lose, remember they're part of a team and the decision has been made. But I reflect that myself in my leadership to the board. So, I think I would have hired myself because we've done that with people. We take chances on people when we feel like their upside is really great and that, the character is good. And one of the key things you would not know about pushing the envelope is when I was in subsidiary things, everybody I ever worked for would have told you I was incredibly loyal. I wanted to be a David under Saul. God chooses. Not only who, but when. And I believe one of the things that has been the best protection of me is I served in some different churches, a couple of which were not very healthy with not very healthy leaders. They weren't in sin, they just weren't good leaders. And I knew a better way to do things. I think time has proven I knew a better way to do things, but I served them with incredible loyalty. And that's why Daniel was easy for me to pick up. I went, man, that's what Daniel did. So I'm looking for a submissive spirit. And so you can be bold and strong and submissive. I do the same thing now when I serve on boards every now and then. Well, I'm used to being king in one castle, and when I'm on another board, I say my piece, and then the group makes a decision, and I wave the flag of our decision. Because I've got one castle where the Lord says, you're the king, human king of it. But in these others, I'm just a player, and I always want to remember that. So does that help with that? Okay, great
I think we'll take time for two more questions. So where are these last two questions? We'll get somebody new right at the back there.
So, what about when you don't have a team? When you just start out, just have a new church plant, and you're trying to guard the gate, but any warm body will actually help you at this point, so.
Good. That's not only a funny question, it's actually a great question because what you do, what you have to do in that stage is you can use people for the process while you're seeing if Jesus is going to change them enough without giving them any platform or title. And that's really what we did a lot of in the early days. So, some of the guys who come and help set up or whatever, like, okay, glad you're doing it, but I'm not going to say, hey, you're the head of the setup team. I'm very slow with title. There's a difference between rubbing shoulders with people, both of you, grabbing an oar and rowing through and letting them into the pen. There is a difference. So in those early days, can you breathe? Okay, we can use you. I get that totally. I've been there. But I didn't put them in a position. You know, sometimes early churches, they form a board too quickly, you know, and it's like, we got the wrong people. Does that help you with that one?
I'm just wondering, you gave an example about, in your own staff, about a situation, and you said there was the justice group, and then there was the All Love and Mercy group, and you said you guys finally figured it out by doing what was in your constitution. I'm just wondering what that was.
I think we called for a month of severance or something like that. I don't even remember what it was, but we just read like, oh, literally, somebody dug it out. We've got one. I've seen it like 4 times in my life. And they dug it out and they said, oh, it says this if somebody is let go. So it was X amount of weeks and this and that, so we just followed it. And then we went home, and on the way home, everybody remembered the things said to her about them. You know, you ever have those brain debates in the shower or whatever? And that's what was so beautiful when we got back together. It's like, wow, we fought like brothers instead of fighting like strangers. It was awesome. So.
All right, let's give Larry Osborne a big hand
you.
here today.